Hi, my name is Barb Nangle. I'm the founder of Higher Power Coaching and Consulting. I want to welcome you to my podcast, Fragmented to Whole, Life Lessons from 12-Step Recovery. This is episode 31, Overcoming Unrealistic Expectations. I just had a conversation with a fellow about unrealistic expectations. He was talking about the fact that he understood that having expectations is what's getting him so upset. He just doesn't know how to handle them. He doesn't know how to not have expectations. I shared with him that when I did the steps with my first sponsor in one of my programs, she helped me realize that one of my worst defects of character was that I had all these unrealistic expectations for other people and the world, really. I had heard well before recovery, expectations are premeditated resentments, but I was like, how the fuck do you not have expectations? I just couldn't wrap my mind around that. How do you live in the world and not have expectations? What I have learned as the process of recovery has unfolded is how to not be attached to the outcome, which is a little bit different way of coming at the issue. I do the footwork, or as one of my friends in recovery says, I walk through the open doors and let the outcome go to God. When I first came into recovery, I had been working for the same boss for 17 years. I was still working for her during my first 2.5 years of recovery, then eventually left because I got laid off. Thank you, God, for doing for me what I could not do for myself. And I had such an issue with her because I just couldn't count on her. She didn't do what she said she was going to do. She didn't follow through on things. 100% of the time, she completely misestimated the amount of time something was going to take her or when she would be somewhere. There was not much that she said that she was going to do that you could count on. And I worked for her for 17 years. And she had been like that since the day I met her. But I kept having these expectations that she shouldn't be that way, that she should be different than that. Lucky for me, that sponsor was a boss, which meant she could help me work on my issues with my boss by, among other things, helping me to see things from the perspective of a boss. Before I go into what she said, I want to share a reading that I found the same week I started working with that sponsor. Coincidence? I think not. It was in one of the daily readers from that same program that I got the sponsor from, and it talked about the fact that learning better ways of dealing with other people is a lifelong process. This recovery program has taught the writer things that have helped, and the first is acceptance. The writer had all sorts of expectations about others' abilities and behavior and expected people to be competent, capable, and productive, behave rationally, and be true to their word. And then the writer said, these are my expectations for myself, and I've had to let them go for others. They said they're still disappointed when someone doesn't follow through, but they don't let it ruin their serenity. When I read that, I was like, holy shit, this is me. Now, back to that sponsor. When I would talk to her about my boss, I would say things like, I get that I have to accept that things are happening the way they're happening because I've learned acceptance is the answer to all my problems. Even though I think it's reasonable for me to expect my boss in a professional setting to follow through and do what she says. And my sponsor said to me, Barb, what's reasonable is to let the boss be the boss. And I was like, what? Even when she's being unreliable and not following through? And my sponsor said, she's the boss, which means that she sets the tone and she's in charge. So if she changes her mind and doesn't tell you, then that's still the way things are going to go because she's the boss. Now, this was exceedingly difficult for me to accept. However, by then, I'd already learned that acceptance is the answer to all my problems and was seeing the enormous power that that belief had had in changing my life experience. What I learned from this situation, among other things, was that my part in all of this was not only that I had unrealistic expectations of my boss and her behavior, but it was also that I stayed. I stayed working for this person for 17 years. I had all this tension and anxiety and resentment and was fucking pissed off at her because she was being the same way she had always been. Oh, and I was blaming her for my problems when she was being exactly the same person the entire time. The way that I tackled this defect of having unrealistic expectations was kind of like Monday morning quarterbacking. I would look at a situation that upset me after the fact and say, all right, what went on here? And I'd be like, oh, that was me having unrealistic expectations. Oh, and this was me having unrealistic expectations. Oh, look at that. Here I was again having unrealistic expectations. And what that did was sensitize me to the types of situations and the people where I was likely to have unrealistic expectations, which meant I started being able to see those opportunities as they came along to not have unrealistic expectations, to not be tied to the outcome. Eventually, it worked for me, at least in the beginning, to lower my expectations and then eventually to not be tied to the outcome of the situation. Now, that doesn't mean I don't ever have expectations of people, but what it does mean is that when I get upset that things don't turn out the way I want them to, I can see, oh, I had an expectation there. And as soon as I realize that this resentment is a result of my expectations, it's not a result of the thing that the person did or of the person. It just removes any resentment that I had, and it removes any kind of tension I have about the situation. Because I understand that if I want peace and serenity, which I do, then I have to let go of that expectation, which I can actually do after the fact. I change my mind about how I think about the situation, about how I think it should have turned out. And that really helps me. And that practice has helped me recognize when I'm forming expectations. One thing that helped me greatly in this regard is that I write in my nightly journal, quote, "Let go of expectations of others and meet my own needs." I write it a few pages ahead, and when I get to it, I read it, I internalize it, and usually find there was something that day that I'm holding on to because of an expectation, and it gets released. Then I flip forward and write it again on a blank page so that every few days I'm reminded not to have expectations of others. And I cannot tell you what that's done for my recovery and for my peace of mind. If I have tension or resentment about a situation, I often find that it was because I had an expectation that wasn't met. Sometimes they're expectations I didn't even know I had until they weren't met. But luckily, I can release any bad feelings that result from that expectation by letting go of the expectation after the fact. Serenity is inversely proportional to expectations and directly proportional to acceptance. So keep your magnifying mind on acceptance and off expectations, because what I focus on grows, like recovery, and what I ignore diminishes, like the negative world. So change the script in your head, maybe from something like, he should fill in the blank, to, oh, well, that's dad, because resentment frays the chords of my serenity. And those expectations are just premeditated resentments. That's it for today. If you like what you've heard here, then you just might be interested in private coaching with me. If that sounds like you, head on over to my website, which is higherpowercoachingandconsulting.com, and click on the contact menu. I'd be happy to schedule a consultation with you to help you make lasting changes in your life, like I've made deep, lasting changes in my life. My ideal client is someone who is ripe for change, but I'll coach anyone who wants to be happy, joyous, and free. So if that's you, shoot me an email. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe so you can be sure to get future episodes of my podcast. Thanks again.